Okay, question number 21. Which element react with oxygen to produce amphoteric oxide? Okay, before starting this question, let's understand what are amphoteric oxides. So, amphoteric oxides are the ones which react both with acids as well as with a base. Okay, these are the oxides of certain metals, and for 5070 and 0610 syllabus you should remember that zinc oxide, lead oxide, aluminium oxide, these are the ones which are amphoteric oxides. Okay, and in addition to that, non-metallic oxides are acidic in nature. So copper is a non-metal, that's why its oxide will not be amphoteric, and according to our discussion, these are the ones which are the amphoteric oxide. So copper is a metal, it will be alkaline. Sulfur is a non-metal, it would be acidic. So the correct option is zinc oxide, right? Question number 22. Element X is in the period 2 of the periodic table. X react with magnesium to form an ionic compound with the formula MgX2. Okay, if it is MgX2, so how do we make the formula? Mg, you know, is in the second group of the periodic table, so Mg positive 2, and when we make the formula, then the charges are just swap, so X should have -1, so that when I will swap it, this one will goes here and this 2 will goes here. Resultantly the formula would be MgX2. Now we have to look for the X which have -1 charge. Okay, so here chlorine is -1, fluorine is -1, and oxygen is -2. Sulfur also belongs to the group 6, so it is -2 as well. That's why C and D wouldn't be our option. We have to compete between A and B. But look at the next statement. It states it is in the period 2. So we can't choose chlorine because chlorine is in the third period. That's why the correct option would be fluorine, B. Rubidium is an element in the group 1 of the periodic table. Okay, which statement about rubidium is correct? Okay, so just look at the properties of the group 1. Group 1 elements, they are called alkali metals. So alkali metals generally have low melting point, and statement is saying that it has higher melting point. Okay, and these melting point decreases down the group. Rubidium is below potassium. So potassium would have the higher melting point and rubidium would have the low. So this statement is incorrect. Okay. It reacts with water to produce acidic solution. Wrong. Because I have already mentioned they are alkali metal. So when they react with water, they produce alkaline solution instead. Okay, so option C, it reacts with water to produce oxygen gas. Again, incorrect. Alkali metals, when react with water, they produce their own hydroxides plus hydrogen gas. It is more reactive than potassium. Yes, this is correct because reactivity increases down the group. As rubidium is below potassium, so it would be more reactive than potassium. So this is the correct statement. Which statement is correct? Noble gases are unreactive because they all have. Now this statement is incorrect. All have, because we know that helium has only 2 electrons in the valence shell, and rest of the noble gases, they have 8 electrons in the valence shell. So we can't say that all the noble gases have 8 electrons in the outer shell. This statement is incorrect. The group 7 element astatine is expected to be black solid at room temperature. Okay, now we have to look at the statement black solid at room temperature. This is very important statement because we know that the color become darker down the group. Color darkens down the group. So, and fluorine and chlorine, first 2 elements, they are the gases, then bromine is the liquid, and below bromine they are solid. So both of these statements are correct. Black, the darkest color, and solid. So our correct statement seems to be B, but we will look at the C and D as well. The reactivity of the element in the both group 1 and group 7 increases down the group. This is again the incorrect statement because reactivity of the group 1 increases down the group, but group 7 decreases down the group. So this is incorrect. When aqueous chlorine is added to aqueous bromine, there is no change in the color. We just have discussed that the reactivity of the halogens decreases down the group. So chlorine is more reactive than bromine. That's why what will happen? It will displaces bromine from here, and bromine has a dark brown color, so there would be a color change. That's how our correct statement is statement B here. M is a metal that form colored compounds. Okay, if it form colored compounds, then we are sure that it must be a transition element. Okay, M is extracted from its oxide either by heating with carbon or by electrolysis. M react with dilute hydrochloric acid. So it tells us about its position in the reactivity series. What is M? Okay, copper or magnesium. Copper could be the option, but magnesium isn't, because magnesium do not form the colored compound. So this statement is incorrect. Copper only. Copper form the colored compound but it do not react with hydrochloric acid because it is below in reactivity series than hydrogen. So again it is wrong statement. And statement C, it is also wrong because of magnesium. Magnesium belongs to the alkaline earth metal group 2 and it do not form the colored compound. So we are left with our last option D, which is of course the correct statement. Question number 26. Which statement about brass is correct? Okay, what is brass? Brass is basically an alloy. And what are the alloys? Alloys are the mixture of metals with another metal or even non-metal. All right, it's a mixture. So first statement says it's a compound. Of course not, because compound have a fixed ratio and mixture, it do not have the fixed ratio. It is an alloy, of course it's an alloy, it's not a isomer, it's not a isotope. So these are incorrect statement and option B is the correct one. Okay, 27. Iron is galvanized with zinc to prevent rusting. Okay, so what is galvanizing? Galvanizing is a process in which we form a barrier for sacrificial protection. What happens? One metal sacrifices and it protects the other one. Which type of protection is provided by galvanizing? So as according to the statement, it should be option B, barrier and sacrificial. Now look at the other statement, question number 28. Iron is extracted from its ore hematite in the blast furnace. Okay, hematite is Fe2O3. Which statement about its extraction process is correct? Air is blown in the blast furnace to react with carbon. This seems to be correct option, because what happens? Carbon plus oxygen, they react and they form carbon dioxide. At the bottom of the blast furnace, a layer of the molten iron floats on the top of the layer of the molten slag. No, this doesn't happen and it seems to be incorrect option. Limestone is decomposed in the blast furnace to produce carbon monoxide. No, it doesn't happen. Actually, calcium carbonate is decomposes and it forms calcium oxide and carbon dioxide instead. So carbon monoxide is not formed. So this is also incorrect. Silicon dioxide, an impurity, is a basic oxide. We have discussed earlier in this paper that non-metallic oxide are acidic. So silicon is a non-metal, so its oxide would be acidic, not basic. So this statement is also incorrect. Option A is the correct one. 29. Chlorine and carbon are both used in the treatment of the domestic water supply. Which row describe one reason for the use of these substances? Okay, so before looking at the option, it's our concept that chlorine is basically used to kill the germs. And why we use carbon? Carbon removes undesirable color taste and smell. So causes a sedimentation of some solid? No. So option A and B makes no sense. We have to compete between option C and D. Now look at carbon. Removes dissolved oxygen from the water? No. So C is the correct one. Which row state an adverse effect of the named pollutant? Okay, so it is also fact part. Air pollutant. Carbon dioxide increases the plant growth? Of course not. It is a greenhouse gas. Methane causes cancer? Not at all. Oxides of nitrogen cause photochemical smoke? Yes. So option C is the correct one. The statement about global warming and greenhouse gases are listed. So which statement are correct? Okay, so statement number 1. Global warming is occurring because more of the earth's thermal energy is released to the space. No, it is not released, it is being absorbed. So option 1 is incorrect. Greenhouse gases both absorb and emit the thermal energy? Yes, this is the correct option. Greenhouse gases level in the atmosphere may be reduced by replacing fossil fuel with hydrogen gas, because hydrogen, only when we burn hydrogen, it will only produce water. The only product is the water, which is of course not harmful. So option D seems to be the correct one. Okay, which compound is an alcohol? Question number 32. So before looking at the option, we all know that the function group of alcohol is OH. So we just have to look the functional group OH. It's the functional group for alcohols. Okay, so is there any OH group present in A? Of course not. So this is incorrect. Here we can see 2 OH group. So this seems to be the correct option. Option C, it has carboxylic group. So it is also incorrect. And there is no OH group in the D as well. So this is also incorrect. So B is the correct one. Okay, 33. An ester has a structural formula CH3COO CH2CH3. Okay, what is the name of the ester? So before looking at the option, we know that the first part of the ester in the formula, it represents acid, and the last part of the ester formula, it represents alcohol. So here we have 2 carbon acid and we have 3 carbon alcohol. All right, and while naming it, alcoholic part comes before the acidic part. So let me write it. It would be CH3 C double bond O O CH2 CH2 CH3. This part is the acidic part, and this part is the alcohol part. So this is basically a 3 carbon alcohol. So it will be propyl, and it is 2 carbon acid, so it would be ethanoate. That's how our correct statement is C. I hope it makes sense to you. 34. Petroleum is separated into the fractions into a fractionating column. Which property of the fractions increases from top to bottom in the column? Okay, so before looking at the option, just look that what happens when we move from bottom to top. Okay, so number of carbon atom decreases, melting point and boiling point also decreases, flammability decreases as well, volatility increases, density decreases, viscosity also decreases. So from this discussion we came to know the only thing that is increasing it is volatility. So our correct option would be option D. Now question number 35. 3 statements about alkanes are listed. Okay. Alkanes are saturated hydrocarbons. Carbon-carbon, single bond. So first statement says they contain carbon and hydrogen only. Yes, they are hydrocarbons. As I said, they are hydrocarbons. What are hydrocarbons? Compound of carbon and hydrogen only. So this statement is correct. They contain only single covalent bond. Of course, I have already written here. They are saturated. Having carbon-carbon single bond mean saturated hydrocarbons. So this statement is also correct. That's how the correct statement is A. Question number 36. The flow chart shows some reactions of the hydrocarbon. Okay, what is happening in the process 1? Saturated hydrocarbon with larger molecule, they are converted into unsaturated hydrocarbon with smaller molecule. Okay, so this statement provides us the information that process 1 is actually cracking. Cracking is a process in which we convert the larger hydrocarbons into the smaller ones. Okay, now unsaturated hydrocarbon with the smaller molecule, when hydrogen is added to them, they are converted into saturated ones. Okay, so this process is called hydrogenation, the addition of hydrogen, and it needs two things. It needs nickel as a catalyst, and of course it needs some heat as well. So the correct statement is not B, that is fractional distillation, not D. So we have to compete between A and C, and A is the correct one, because it says कि in the condition in the second process, the conditions are nickel as a catalyst and heat, and not heating with the acid. Question number 37. The structure of a condensation polymer is shown. Okay, here's the structure. Which two monomers form this polymer? All right. So before looking at the option, try to find out our repeating unit. So first repeating unit is, I guess this is our first repeating unit. All right, and this is of course our next repeating unit, and first is again this one, and second is again this one. So there are two repeating unit. Okay, so let's look at the incomplete part of the polymer. Of course there would be an H here and H here, and there would be an OH here, which of course being removed and form the water. So the first monomer is H and H, CH2 and H and H, and the next is CH2, CH2, C double bond O, OH. So from this discussion, of course not the option 1. Why? Because it has 2 carbon here and we have only 1 carbon. Of course not option B, again it has 2 carbon here. So option C and D seems to be correct. Look at the other monomer. C is, I think, the correct one, and in option D there is only 1 carbon, although in our monomer there are 2 carbon. So this is also incorrect. The correct statement for this is statement C. Okay, question number 38. A titration is completed. 25 cm cube of aqueous sodium hydroxide is added to the conical flask. Okay. A few drops of the methyl orange indicator are added. Dilute hydrochloric acid is added slowly to the mixture until the color changes. Okay. So what do we need to add 25 cm cube of the aqueous sodium hydroxide? Of course we need volumetric pipette here. So if the option is volumetric pipette, then measuring cylinder wouldn't be the option. So option B is incorrect. Okay, apparatus used to add acid. How do we add acid? In titration, we use burette to add the acid. So option D isn't the correct one. So we have to compete between A and C now. Now look at the color of the indicator. Indicator being used is methyl orange. Okay, so when methyl orange is used, it is yellow in alkali and it is red or orange in acid. Keeping this information in our mind, option C seems to be the correct one. Yellow to orange, as you can see, yellow to orange. So this seems to be the correct one. Option A says red to orange, which is incorrect. Okay, question number 39. An impure sample of compound X has a melting point 120 degrees Celsius. X is purified and its melting point is measured again. It is impure. So the melting point of the pure one should be higher than 120 degrees Celsius. Why? Because melting point is lowered due to impurities. If impurity is present, then the melting point would be lower. So that's how, if something has 120 degrees Celsius melting point and it's impure, it's mean when it would be pure, then the melting point would be more than 120. So keeping this thing in our mind, of course B and D wouldn't be the correct one. So we have to compete between option A and C, which says 125. Okay, method of purifying. According to the question statement, it is a solid because its melting point is 120. So it is a solid. So of course we will not use distillation. This is used for the separation of the liquid. We will use crystallization because crystallization is used for the purification of solids. That's how option A is the correct one. Okay, coming towards the last part of the paper, question number 40. Samples of the two compounds P and Q are tested. The result of the test is shown. Okay, so first of all we are adding dilute hydrochloric acid into it, and it gives off a gas that turns lime water milky. So this must be carbon dioxide. Okay, no observable change. It means there is no color. So if carbon dioxide is being obtained, it's mean in P there must be carbonate. Okay, if there is carbonate present, it's mean option A is not the correct one. Okay, acidifying with dilute nitric acid, then add aqueous barium nitrate and no precipitate is formed. If no precipitate is formed, it's mean there wouldn't be any sulfate here, because if sulfate is present then it will form barium sulfate which have white precipitate. Okay, then it says no observable change. If there is no observable change, it's mean it's not zinc, it's not aluminium, they are absent, otherwise it will form the precipitate. Okay, and again, if the flame test is being done, so it gives lilac flame. Okay, if it is given lilac flame, so it must be potassium, because potassium is the one which gives the lilac flame. So keeping this thing in our mind, D is again the incorrect option. Okay, so we have to compete between option B and C. Now look at the table and it say green precipitate are formed. Green precipitate are formed both for the iron 2 and chromium 3, but these green precipitates are insoluble in excess. So if they are insoluble in excess, then it must be chromium 3, because iron 2 is soluble in excess. So the correct option is option C. Alright, thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.